Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. I'm your host, Julie Kratz, and this season we will be unpacking real trends, hot topics in the workplace around allyship and inclusion. Our goal is that each week you leave with tangible tools, information, practical strategies that you can take back to allies at your organization. Let's dig in to this week's topic. Hey, it's Julie back with another hot topic. This is one that's near and dear to my heart because I got to collaborate with my dear friend, fellow ally and DEI thought leader, Mita Mallick. And Mita is just a treasure trove of information. She just wrote a book, Reimagine Inclusion, Debunking 13 Myths to Transform Your Organization. And when I sat down with her, we did an event, an interview for my Forbes column that I'm bringing over to this space because I think that content's highly relevant in audio format as well. When I talked to her, the big question everyone wants to ask is, why did you write this book? And, when you think about myths, there's a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation out there, and the DEI world is no different in a politically polarized. Sadly, we're just not talking to each other as much as we used to across divisive issues. And if you would have ever told me DEI would be a divisive issue, I knew it was charged and triggering, but to divide people and policies and families is a really real and sad place that we are. But what Mita shared with me, and what I love about her work on myths, is she's very clear that this is a journey. Unintentionally, we often put the burden on individuals from historically marginalized communities to educate allies. And we can't continue to burden Black and Brown individuals to educate us on the hurt, the harm that they continue to experience, both, in the communities and workplaces. And so, as an ally, what she recommends is that it's your job to gain understanding and empathy for lived experiences that aren't your own. And I think the key word there is empathy, because you'll never fully understand the lived experiences of somebody that's very different from yourself. As a white person, I often share that I think white voices are really important in the DEI conversation because, let's be honest, these problems were largely created by people that look like me. Why would we expect historically marginalized folks to solve the problems they didn't themselves create? But having said that, my lived experience falls short on a lot of the dimensions of diversity, and so I will never fully understand what it's like to walk around in Black or brown skin. I can empathize, I can try to understand, I can educate myself, most certainly, I own that. But I will never fully understand, the looks that people often get, or just the subtle, different treatment that someone might get simply because of their skin color. And then that goes the same for a lot of allies. It's very rare that folks experience disability, racial marginalization, gender marginalization, being a part of the LGBTQ plus community. That's a lot of dimensions at play. So all of us have some sort of gap in our lived experience that we need to fill in with education. So back to Mita and her book. She summarized 13 myths, and in the interest of time today, I won't go through all of them because you should buy the book. I highly recommend it. It's really clever storytelling. She tells great stories, real life stories that happened to her and other allies based on these myths. But the 5 that I plucked out that I thought were most intriguing that Mita and I covered in our interview was treating diversity and inclusion like a check the box, one and done activity. And this is still very common. We've seen this in the recent retreat on DEI efforts that we already did it in 2020 and 2021. We're done. Yeah, I wish. There's a lot more substance to this conversation. And in fact, doubling down now is a competitive advantage that organizations, just knowing the diversity that will be certainly reflected in our future workforce and consumer base and communities we hope to serve. It's smart to keep at this work now, especially when others in your competition might be retreating, because that runway is pretty short. We know that the workforce becomes majority Gen Z here in short order, very racially diverse generation, very fluid from a gender perspective, as well as LGBTQ plus and neurodiversity. So it's just smart to keep up this effort now. Another one that Mita points to is launching a mentorship program to increase diversity and leadership representation. I love what Mita said about this. She said, as a brown woman, I have been over-mentored and under-sponsored in my career. And I've shared that sentiment with others, and they have very, very wholeheartedly agreed. And I think this is something that affects women in general, but specifically women of color, those with intersectional identities, because it's easy to give advice, private one-on-one conversations. Your mentorship is a one-to-one relationship, whereas sponsorship is a one-to-many relationship. So that's career decisions, things that really make a difference in someone's career. And so sponsorship, really focusing on that, is a critical component that Mita recommends in her book. Another myth, extending maternity leave to show support for women. Hey, this is fantastic. It can be helpful for caregivers. And, in the United States, 70% of caregivers, primary caregivers, are women. But that leaves a lot of room for fathers, adoptive parents, those that, when you think about the childbearing years, we tend to minimize women's contributions because of this maternal wall bias that we have alive and well in corporate America. There's actually data on this that when men are more likely to be promoted when they become fathers, women are less likely to be promoted or get pay increases. And McKinsey has well documented this in their research for the broken rung they have found in their Women in the Workplace report over the years. So dig in if you want more data than that. One of the other myths that Mita points out is conflating employee resource groups, also known as ERGs, as the DEI strategy. And this is an interesting one because I'd never thought about this, but I see it a lot. So ERGs are really important. Only 40% of companies have ERGs. So if your company has it, it's actually not as common as you might think. I'm still working with organizations to get theirs started. And I think really being intentional with the strategy, the charter, the process, leadership engagement, resourcing, all of those are really pivotal questions to ask up front. But don't confuse your ERG efforts as the DEI strategy. It's one part. So a DEI strategy is thinking about representation from a diversity perspective, thinking about inclusion and that sense of belonging, hopefully, and psychological safety that we're cultivating, as well as addressing inequities in our systems. ERGs are certainly a part of that. So, ERGs usually fulfill two main purposes: support for marginalized groups and education for allies and people that want to better support those groups. It's almost always women, folks of color, LGBTQ plus to start, but I'm seeing organizations that have been at this a while have more than a dozen employee resource groups, folks like Salesforce and a lot of the bigger global companies, veterans, disabilities, neurodivergence, caregivers. Oh, I think that's such a really beautiful idea for an employee resource group. So get creative, but start with the big components where you're going to have the most population to attend and gain support and allyship. Myth number 5, and there's many, many more. So again, Mita's book dives into way more. But I love what Mita says about this one. We live in a world where we don't have a lack of content. We need more leaders to take the time to educate themselves so they can effectively lead diverse teams and unlock the potential of their teams. Bingo, right? So that's her myth about expecting underrepresented groups to educate the majority group, the dominant group, about diversity. So allyship is about taking responsibility for your own education and actions while being sensitive to the needs of others and actively working to create an inclusive environment. So it's not the job of the few, it's the job of the many to lead these efforts. And if you don't understand, there's great content. There's tons of books, resources, podcasts that weren't even available a few years ago. So things have changed. It's gotten better. Mita's book can help you, but it's your responsibility, right? It's something we have to take ownership as leaders. So love these myths and unpacking them with my pal Mita. Highly recommend you grab her book. And stay with us, listeners. We're going to uncover some more hot topics in the coming weeks.
Thank you for listening to the Diversity Pivot podcast. My hope is that you walked away with a tangible tool, insight, or information that you can share with other allies on the journey. If you liked this week's episode, please leave us a review. Your feedback means a tremendous amount to us. We'll be back next week with another hot topic.